Prigozhin is gone, but Wagner will continue fighting for Putin. This is the title of the opinion piece by the Federal's managing editor KS Dakshina Murthy. The opinion piece discusses the aftermath of Yevgeny Prigozhin's death, who was the chief of Russia's private military Wagner group. It also highlights Russia's discrete succession planning, the role of Wagner in African nations, and draws parallels between Wagner and Western private military contractors. So, this is actually quite an interesting topic. So, I have the writer himself with me to answer a few questions, and help us understand the situation better. Thank you for joining, Dakshin. So, in your article, you mentioned that Yevgeny Prigozhin's mutiny against Putin marked his death warrant. Could you elaborate on the dynamics between Prigozhin and Putin that led to this turning point? How do you think Prigozhin's actions might have influenced Putin's decision making?
See, Prigozhin and Putin go back a long way. They were, they started off as friends and friends not politically, but Prigozhin had a chain of restaurants. He was known to be a very good chef and manager, and then he bumped into Putin at some point, and then they somehow they hit it well. They hit it off well, and the chemistry was good, and so they got closer at a very personal level. So Prigozhin basically got close to Putin, not from any major event, but over a period of time. So, and he also won the trust of Putin. And that is the reason how Prigozhin became very well known. And then eventually Putin started relying on him for various activities of the state. So informally, more often than not. And slowly people also started getting to, the name also started getting, known. And and he was always associated with Putin. So wherever Putin was, you would find Prigozhin with him. So that was the kind of a relationship they had. And so it was but natural for Putin to entrust upon this task of managing Wagner to Prigozhin. But as the years continued and as particularly the Ukraine conflict started, and then Wagner got into the conflict, and then so there was some kind of a differences of opinion that he encountered with the chief of the army staff of Russia, the Russian armed forces, and that one thing led to another, and there was also a kind of a crisis which the Wagner faced, in the sense that there was some resentment within the ranks because they were not being paid on time, and there was some issue about money, etc. So one thing led to another, and then also there were supplies which the Russian armed forces were giving to Prigozhin that was not, also arriving on time. There were delays, and so Prigozhin, kind of started the whole thing by openly criticizing the tactics used by the Russian armed forces, by the Russian military. And that was something, probably that was the last straw. And Putin did not like it, but really nothing much happened after that. And then post that, there was this attempt at a revolt, and Prigozhin decided that, enough is enough. And he probably calculated that it would be like a mark of protest, and it wouldn't be taken so seriously. But I think he got like situation, and Putin being a autocrat, nobody can challenge him like that. And in fact, because what happens is when a person like Prigozhin challenges Putin, what happens is it also gives a lot of currency to the West, which is backing Ukraine against Russia. And there were a lot of articles saying that since it looks like as if Putin has become weak, you have a mutiny in Russia, and Russia is in trouble. So this will not do good for a country which is at war. And Russia needs all the optimism, all the positive vibes. And then you suddenly have somebody like Prigozhin turning again. And Prigozhin, mind you, very, very close to Putin. And he turns against him and then openly revolts. So it's a loss of face for Putin. So obviously Putin wouldn't, stand
Tolerate it.
Yeah. And in the past, there have been others. There have been oligarchs who are very powerful in Russia. and who are all subject to attacks in other parts of the world. Just because you are not in Russia doesn't mean you are safe. You can be attacked anywhere. So that's what happened. Yeah.
Okay. So, in your article, you discuss the importance of Wagner Group for Russia and its role in various conflicts, particularly in Africa. Could you provide more insight into how Wagner's activities in Africa, including security operations and resource acquisition, have actually impacted Russia's geopolitical strategy and its relationship with African nations?
So what a private military contractor like Wagner does is that it is an extension of the Russian state. Though it is formed as a private military contractor, it is a de facto controlled by the Russian state. But what happens is when it's controlled by the Russian state, it is not a formal military like the Russian military, because the Russian military will have certain rules and regulation. It will have certain norms, and it'll be directly linked to the Russian state. But in the case of Wagner, it has got far more leeway in the sense that it is not accountable. News about it need not necessarily appear anywhere, and what its activities are not generally announced in public. Nobody really knows how they work. So it's like a closed group. It is basically the private. It's a larger issue of a private military contractor, which is the leaf taken from the Americans, because in the 90s you had the Blackwater Group in the US, which was a private military contractor. So they did a similar thing for the Americans. So the Russians have picked up the cue from there, and they have formed his own group. For instance, Britain is supposed to have 5 private military contractors. So it's slowly become the norm around the world, especially the big powers who have interests in other parts of the world. And Russia, also Africa is very important in a geopolitical sense for Russia, right? And Russia is not in a position where it can directly influence activities in Africa. So the Wagner Group does it. And what the Wagner Group does is that it's not too many soldiers. For instance, they have influence in about 10 countries in Africa. And, in each place, they have a very small group. But this group is heavily armed, and they work very closely with the presidents or the heads of state of these countries. They give them private security, and they ensure that there is a certain stability in those countries. So the rulers are very happy, and in turn they give them a lot of benefits like royalties from gold, diamond, whatever natural resources they have, and that's a lot of money. And so two things get achieved. Number one, Russia gets directly politically strong in these countries because by influencing the rulers, and secondly, they also make a lot of money. And the money, some of it, of course, is used by Wagner, and the rest is given back to the Russian state. So it's a win-win situation for Russia, and with very least of very at very low risk, I would say. Yeah.
From what you just said, how does a sovereign nation decide where to send their own military and where to send mercenaries? And why do you think Russia decided to send a mercenary to Africa, not their own military?
Because what typically happens is a sovereign nation and its military, which is linked to that particular nation, they have there are certain rules of engagement. For instance, you can't say if things go wrong. For instance, say in any African country, if something went wrong, and say if Wagner is blamed, Russia can even wash its hands off it and say, see, we have nothing to do with it. So it's called a plausible deniability. So which means that Russia will say, sorry, it's a mistake made by that particular group. We didn't have anything to do with it. I'll give you an example. For instance, in Iraq, which I mentioned in my article, there was a massive, there was an attack by the Blackwater group because they were upset when there was a bomb blast in Iraq, in Baghdad. And they took out their anger by indiscriminately firing and killing civilians in this place called Nisor Square in 2007. So the world was shocked because it was not a conflict zone. There was nothing going on at that point in time. You just had groups of soldiers from Blackwater indiscriminately firing. They just came and they killed, I mean, in cold blood. I mean, so it caused massive ruckus. Just imagine if this had been done by the US Army, then the US government would have directly been implicated, and it would have caused massive complications, because it means a loss of credibility. It would have attracted attention, negative attention for the US from around the world, and even whatever action is possible against the US. But in this case, what happened? It was Blackwater which took all the blame. And the Blackwater, some people were arrested, and eventually 4 of them were even jailed. But it did not touch the US government. So the US government also said, oh, this is very shocking, this should not have been done. And they also criticized it, and they, try to make it appear as if they're taking some action, though it is their people only. So what happens is that when you outsource a war or a conflict, into these kind of regions, there are advantages for these big powers. So this outsourcing of war, incidentally, is not something new. In modern history, the Americans started it in the mid-90s. But if you go back in time, there were kings and emperors in the past who actually used the mercenaries and the abilities of people to fight for their country. So it's not completely new in that sense, but in modern history, yeah. So this is a new trend that is again developing.
Yeah, this mercenary culture is very old. We even have even Chola history saying that people, Chola kings bought mercenaries to fight their wars. Moving on, my next question is, your article suggests that Putin has taken measures to prevent Wagner Group from becoming too centralized and powerful after Prigozhin's demise. Could you explain how these measures might actually reshape Wagner's operations and its role as a private military contractor in future conflicts?
No, what will basically have, what Putin did was, instead of, Putin probably realized that it was tricky to, focus on one group, and which is what happened in the case of Wagner. And then what did Wagner do? What did Prigozhin do? He turned around and mutinied. So this kind of a situation should not occur again. So what Putin has done is that, according to reports, obviously, so what he has done is, he has planned to divide the work which Wagner did with 2 other competitors called Redoubt, and the other one is called Convoy. Sorry, it's called Convoy and Redoubt. So what Putin has done, I'll just repeat that. What Putin has done is to divide the work of Wagner into the work that was given to Wagner to also competitors called Convoy and Redoubt. And these two, so what will happen is the work will get spread out. So it will be, so you'll have 3 or 4 groups working at the same time in a similar situation, but in different parts of in different operations. So what will happen is that there won't be any one person like Prigozhin who will become very well-known or, become popular or etc., etc. So what it basically does is that it ensures that Russia's work gets done, but without empowering the private military contractor beyond a certain point.
Okay. Thank you for your inputs, Dakshin. Viewers, please read his opinion piece. The link is on the description box below. And please log on to the Federal for more such interesting stories. Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more news and updates.